budget meeting. Now open the meeting. If there are anyone here that wishes to address the committee, you may come to the podium at this time. See none, so we will ask Mayor Britton if he will come up and give us a budget overview for the fiscal year 2023-24. Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, everyone, and welcome for half of you who are entering your first budget process, and I can promise you it'll be a real learning experience. And hopefully tonight, the objective for tonight is just to give you a broad brush on what the budget that's in your notebooks is about, and just identify some of the issues that we'll be dealing with during this time. I'll also do a little bit of I guess, teaching, so to speak, on some of the basis of government not accounting, but how budgets are structured. And you hear me talk about buckets and buckets of money here and there, and so we'll talk about that in the process. As far as detailed questions, as far as detail and departments, if you'll hold on to those questions until later on in the budget process when we get to that specific department, and then we'll have the department head here to answer those questions. And my purpose here tonight is just to kind of give you an overview, and I can answer some questions, but when it gets into the real detail about why they ask for this or that, then I would prefer that you ask the department head that question. I want to start out by thanking some folks, thanking Finance Director Amanda Hale for the work that she did. She spent many hours on this product, as well as Dennis Fox, our financial accountant in the office, and the department heads from the various offices. They did a great job in looking at their budgets and trimming in some areas and asking for what they need in others. So we'll go from there. All right, I guess the central theme for this budget and where we are as a community is that our economy, our local economy, is strong. And you hear on the news, that the sky's falling in a lot of areas, but in East Tennessee and in Hamblen County specifically, our economy's strong, and there's a lot going on, both in the public sector and the private sector. And so just like these pictures, you have the Justice Center picture. Morristown Landing has opened in the last few months. You have the new health department location that's been identified and is moving forward. You have the landfill expansion, which is infrastructure that's needed for a growing community. You have new Lincoln Heights Elementary School as well, and there's an image there for what the school will look like. Our economy, as far as unemployment, we have returned to pre-COVID employment, with unemployment in March being 3.4%. And so if you want a job, you can find a job in Hamblen County. There's hundreds of them available. And we've had growth in multiple sectors of the economy, in manufacturing, in housing, in hospitality with the new restaurants, and medical. In manufacturing, just in the last year, we've had 27 companies expand in some way, form, or add new equipment, or replace new equipment, or make investments into their companies. We've had 27 manufacturers do that. $180 million of investments, create or commit to 670 jobs, and as I mentioned, there's hundreds of jobs available. Van Hool is still on the board. That's the bus manufacturer from Belgium. Their plan right now is to start construction in 2025 and be hopefully manufacturing buses, travel buses, late 25 or early 2026 as the economy continues to recover from COVID. You know, one of the things that we should all be proud of, and specifically those in education, is we're the home of the top community college in the state of Tennessee and the top TCAT in the state of Tennessee. And that means that we've got tremendous job skills training programs going on in this community. And plus the work that both Walter State and TCAT do with our school system, with dual enrollment. And there's a big dual enrollment program in our high schools, and so we can be proud of, and we boast this in our recruiting of business and industry about the job skills training that we have here in Morristown. All right, transportation, just to give you a little update on a couple of projects on State Route 34 or Highway 11E. The demolition of the buildings, most 95% of the property has been purchased for it'll be the 4-lane highway with a turn lane in the center. So it's a 5-lane highway going from Pope Road or there at the City Fire Hall at Jesse Drive to 11E where it meets Route 34, or Morris Boulevard, where it meets 11E, right there at what used to be Universal, and I think it's Clayton Homes now. So the demolition of, I went on a ride with TDOT a few weeks ago, and they're going to start in this summer demolishing some of the mobile homes, mostly some other buildings that they've purchased that are not on the railroad track, but off of the railroad track. They're going to start demolishing those in the summer and fall. And then next spring, when they bid the construction contract for that job, there'll be the demolition of the buildings that are right up against the railroad. Because to demolish buildings that are near the railroad, it requires a certain type of insurance, and usually just the major contractors can afford that kind of insurance. So that's kind of the latest update on the 4-laning of that road. Then the intersection of 25E right there at ETPC, the East Tennessee Progress Center, which is the industrial park in South Hamblen County. That interchange is going to be redesigned, and that's to help develop traffic moving out of the industrial park toward the interstate, and also to do away with, in the center of that interchange, where trucks and cars get stuck in the middle, right there. They're going to do away with all that, and it'll be functional and completed by the time that Van Hool opens. That's the target date there. And then Highway 160 and the corridor study. Our transportation planning organization has contracted with a company along with TDOT to do a study of Highway 160 and how we can keep traffic flowing on 160, but also make it safer in getting on and off of 160. And the preliminary plans that the consultant has come up with is primarily what they looked for was to eliminate as many left-hand turns onto 160 as possible, because that's where the accidents have occurred, are turns across traffic turning left onto 160, and try to make it solely right-hand turns. And so that's what they've done. And part of the objective was also to limit any signalization on that road. And there's only one traffic light that is recommended at this point in the plan, and that is at the intersection of 160 and 25E at those two intersections. They've had the crash data and the volume of left-hand turns at that intersection, as well as some fatalities there, saying that intersection does justify signalization there at 25E and 160. Residential growth, all of you know how many houses are going up throughout the county, and last year or in the past year, we've about $40 million in residential investment, 138 in commercial investment and throughout the county in both single, multifamily, and then there's also some new subdivisions are also planned. Okay, for the third year, we did a citizen survey. City of Morristown started doing one several years ago, and I thought that the information they gathered from their survey was interesting and helped them in their planning and let them know what their citizens were thinking. So a couple of years ago, we started a very simple citizen survey, 5 questions, then we added some questions this year just about the 4th of July event just to see, help us make some decisions on about the entertainment, the fireworks, and that kind of thing while we were doing the survey. So we had 330 respondents, and we promoted it on social media, print, and broadcast media, but it was non-scientific. It was just those who volunteered to do the survey. So we had 330 respondents, and in their responses, they ranked the services, or it was mostly geared toward different county government services, from 5 being the highest to 1 being the lowest. So one of the questions dealt with the importance of county services. It's hard to see these on here, so if you want a copy of the survey, you can just ask me for it, and I'll get it to you. But the services that received the highest ranking out of 5 as far as importance was garbage pickup was number 1 at 4.6. Highway was number 2. The highway service about road maintaining was 4.6. Education was at 4.5. And then law enforcement was 4.5. So the major functions of county government were the ones that ranked the highest. Now, as far as satisfaction with county services, the ranking number 1 was garbage collection at 4.2 out of 5. Education in the sheriff's department was 3.7. The health department and the library were 3.6. Business and job skills training was 3.5. So those were the highest ratings for those various services. And then for the question about what services do you think need more funding? And the top 5 were, number 1 was highway, no surprise there. Number 2 was education. Number 3 was veteran service, which is funded solely by the federal government. Number 4 is the sheriff's department. And number 5 is animal control. So those were the top 5 for more funding in this citizen survey. So interesting results there. And then the last question dealt with what was the preferred method where the respondent got information about county government and how and news about Hamblen County. And number 1 was social media. And again, we can take these results and apply that to the campaign on the bulk waste new rules. And social media was number 1. The county website was number 2. You had radio as number 3, and print and email was 10%, was 4, and then others were at 14%, which we're thinking probably just word of mouth. So social media and electronic media primarily were the top for getting news on Hamblen County and its services. Okay, budget process. This being for 7 of you, your first time through for the budget. Here's how we go about it. In February, we send out the budget packet, so to speak, to the various county departments with their current budget and some budget history, then where they are in their current year spending, and then a blank line. Blank lines for each of the line items. Or what do you need for next year? And then in March, we meet with me and Amanda and Dennis, and Bobby was involved in some of the larger departments, met with the department heads and discussed their needs, it was a good time for us to learn more about how their offices operate and what trends they see in their operation. And so that happens in March, and then in April, we put the budget together. We take that input, we put the budget together, which you have in your notebooks, and put the final touches on it in May. And then this month and next month in June, you'll be hearing from different departments on their requests and some of the challenges that we face in this budget. And then in June, our goal right now is to adopt the budget on June 29th. And so it will be adopted before the new fiscal year starts on July 1. Now, one thing I want you to be sure that you understand is this document is fluid. There's changes that will occur in each meeting, or we will start each meeting with maybe new sheets for different tabs in your notebook that you'll need to replace old sheets, and we'll ask you to throw the old sheets on the floor so you don't get them confused, and then we'll pick them up. But it's a fluid document, and it changes just because we have new information or decisions you made the prior meeting. So it's a fluid document that will change throughout this process. Okay, here's the buckets I was talking about. All right, the buckets of where the money goes to fund various services. In county government, there are funds that operate the various departments. Like, for example, here with these buckets, you have the general fund. General fund is where the sheriff's department is funded. It's where the health department is funded. You have all your courthouse offices, the court system, the library, our contribution to the library. They're all come from planning, zoning, code enforcement, all come from the general fund. So you'll hear more talk about the general fund than any other fund, because that's where the various departments are housed, or in the general fund. Then you have schools, and Mr. Bunch will come and make a presentation on the school board's budget that it has passed, and the requests they are made. And there's in the school system, there's a new state funding formula that is making major changes, and a major infusion of money as well, and which will, I guess, you have to maintain your current funding for schools, but it doesn't ask or require any additional funding for the next 3 or 4 years. And then you have your debt service. That's where we make our house payment. That's where we make the payment on the bonds that we've sold. We'll talk about that, and and I'll give you a brief overview on that tonight. So that's a bucket where part of the tax rate, property tax rate, goes into debt fund to help make our payments. Then the highway fund is where our gas tax money goes, and that's where any road paving is done. The operation of the road department, the highway department, is paid for out of that bucket or that fund. And then solid waste is the sanitation department, is the garbage collection. Solid waste, that word will be used back and forth. I hear it solid waste, either garbage collection or solid waste garbage disposal, meaning the landfill. But in this context, it'll be garbage collection. It'll be the sanitation department. So that service is paid out of the solid waste fund. There's also the drug fund, which our drug enforcement operation is, some of the expenses there are paid out of there. And a new fund that was formed just a couple of years ago is the opioid settlement fund. It's Fund 128, and that's where the money that we collect off the opioid settlements go into that fund and are set aside for certain purposes. And you'll see how some of that money is proposed to be used in the coming year. Okay, revenue sources are we have these services that we provide, so how do we pay for them? And it's paid for by taxes. And you have the local taxes, you have your property tax. County governments have a limited source of revenue where you have property tax, sales tax, and wheel tax. And we have all three. Some counties don't have a wheel tax. And then we have various fees that we collect. You also have business taxes the state of Tennessee collects for us and pays us. You have state grants, and there's been more state grants with the ARP money that the federal government has paid to the state, and then the state has issued grants or competitive grants if we want to submit an idea for funding. But there's a lot of state grant money that we receive, and then there's some federal money that go through the state. So our source of revenue, primarily property taxes, sales tax, wheel tax, and then fees and state grants. Here's just a slide to show you, we talked about how the economy is going well. And we've had a lot of growth in building, not only residential, but in commercial and industrial investments. And what this slide shows, and what this graph shows, is the growth in our assessments. And so the assessor's office puts a value on a piece of property, and then based on whether it's residential or commercial, there's an assessed amount applied to it, and then the tax is calculated on that assessed amount. So you can see on the graph from 2019 and 2020 to 2021, you see that large increase. That was a reappraisal year. We do reappraisals every 5 years, and what happens in that process is the property values come to market level, and then the tax rate is lowered. A certified tax rate is calculated by the state of Tennessee, and the tax rate is lowered. So market values go up, and the tax rate is lowered, and in theory, it's supposed to equal out. But in reality, it doesn't always work that way. And so that's the difference if you have a question about that. But then you take from 2020, 21 to today, and you see normally it's about a 1% increase. And this year, for 23, 24, it's a 4% increase in assessments. So we had a very good year in assessments, and a lot of that is with residential housing. All right, our current property tax structure. Now, the way the tax rate goes, we have two tax rates in Hamblen County. We have two tax rates. One is for property inside the city of Morristown. Property that is inside the city of Morristown pays a tax to the general fund, the general debt fund, and the school system. And that's a total of $1.76 of $100 of assessed value. Then there's the rate on the outside, on property outside the city limits, where we provide garbage collection. And so there is a tax rate for garbage collection that is added, and that's the 21 cents. So the outside rate is $1.97 for $100 of assessed value. So you have the inside rate, and then you have an outside rate. Now overall, in the city, 70% of the tax is paid by commercial industrial taxpayers inside the city. But then when you go countywide and you look at it countywide, it's about 50-50, residential versus commercial and industrial. The bottom of that page and that screen, a penny on the tax rate. You'll hear the conversation about a penny. What does a penny generate? A penny on the tax rate generates $162,000 countywide and $61,000 outside. So if you wanted to raise the property tax rate for sanitation, then you would calculate that by $61,000 per penny. Okay, then here's something that we should be proud of, is that's how our property tax rates compare to other communities in East Tennessee. And our combined tax rate, City of Morristown and Hamblen County, is the third lowest in East Tennessee. And the city tax rate is $1.40. and you compare that to the city rate that we have at 176, and that's $3.16. And that's the third lowest in East Tennessee, and has been second or third lowest for many years. And that can be, I think, attributed to the tax base that we have, and the diversity in our tax base, and also in the work that our predecessors have done for decades as far as industrial development and making Morristown and Hamblen County an economic center for the Lakeway region. All right, here's a graph about sales tax and sales tax collections. And in the blue section of this graph is the sales tax that was budgeted. We projected in those years that we would collect this amount of money in sales tax, and then the amount in red is what we collected over budget. And so we are very, you'll find out during this process, we are very conservative in our projections of revenue, and that has helped us build the fund balances that we have, and has helped us be stable financially as a county, in the county government. So you can see that, and also the increase right there from 1920 to 2021, you see a little jump in sales tax. That is when the state legislature changed the law about the distribution of sales tax collected over the internet. And it was a big boom for counties, and part of the purpose of it was to help rural counties fund their school systems. And because you'll see in just a minute that the first 50 cents of any local sales tax dollar by law goes to schools. And so that's why that change, the U.S. Supreme Court helped by requiring that all purchases over the internet, the companies have to collect sales tax and then distribute them to the states, where the product was purchased. Then the state of Tennessee changed the law thanks to strong advocacy by the Tennessee County Services Association, the County Commission Association, County Mayor's Association, where then it's distributed to where the package is delivered. And so that's the sales tax goes to those jurisdictions, and the county governments benefited from that. So, for example, we'll look at this year we're in today, which is the second column from the right, fiscal year 22-23, we budgeted $18.6 million in sales tax. And we're anticipating collecting about over $21 million in sales tax. And the school system alone is $20 million of that. And they had a big year in sales tax collections. This next slide shows you, gives you a little information about how sales tax is distributed. Again, the first 50 cents of any local sales tax dollar that's collected goes to schools by law. And so this year, we anticipate collecting over $20 million in sales tax, which is $3.1 million over budget for the schools. So where that money goes, that goes into their fund balance. And you'll find that the school system uses their fund balance for capital projects, roof replacements, door replacements of buildings, especially in these days of tight security at schools. They'll supply during their budget presentation a list of capital projects that they plan for this year. And then you'll see in the chart below where we allocate sales tax, the second half of the sales tax, or what happens to the second half is this. First half goes to schools. The second half of the sales tax goes to the jurisdiction where the tax was collected. So let's say that Chick-fil-A collects a bunch of sales tax money. Then that second half of that sales tax dollar goes to the city of Morristown. So the city of Morristown uses those funds for their purposes. And then if it's collected, let's say, at a Dollar General store maybe that's outside the city. Maybe one in Whitesburg maybe, or those sales tax dollars come back to Hamblen County. And so what we do with them, how we budgeted them this year is we did a little bit in the general fund, $1.6 million in garbage collection, and then $86,000 went to highway, $63,000 went to debt service, and then last July the commission moved $250,000 out of solid waste to highway capital projects to pave with. And that's been used for paving. So that was a one-time transfer that they decided to do last summer because we had been building fund balance in the solid waste fund because of that sales tax collections. Okay. Let's talk about the general fund. We'll talk about this year's budget, or next year, 23, 24, and give you some thoughts about what we have and what we're proposing for this coming fiscal year. This graph shows you how we've built the fiscal year 2022 audit. We had a fund balance of $12.5 million, which is the largest fund balance we've ever had. This year, we used some of that fund balance. We used about $533,000 of it, or we're anticipating that we'll use it. We won't know till the audit that we get next fall in winter. But we anticipate that we'll use about $500,000 of it. And that's pretty amazing when you think about what we've done this year, your all's first year in office. We've spent about $2 million that we did not budget originally. And so we spent about $2 million of fund balance. And about $590,000 of it was for the shopping center for the health department, which was our part of it. You had 911 is paying about $1.1 million. And then we paid the rest out of the general fund. The health insurance infusion into the health insurance plan was $454,000. You bought 6 patrol cars that the sheriff proposed. He found them. They were on a lot. You chose to go ahead and get them and not, wait till next year when cars may not be available. So that was about $210,000. And then it was planned. It wasn't in the budget when you guys took office, but it was planned to spend $650,000 from the general fund on the Justice Center project. And so that money was moved from the general fund to the construction fund this year. So you take those 4 items, which was close to $2 million, and you only finish the year $500,000 in the hole. No, that's not bad at all. When you think about that, we have a very healthy fund balance. We had these needs, these capital needs, and we use fund balance to do that. So we anticipate entering the coming fiscal year, the 23-24 fiscal year, with almost a $12 million fund balance in the general fund. Okay, in the budget document in your notebooks, here's just a brief overview of some of the items that are in there, especially the important. And all of them are important, but these are some more critical ones. And the first is dealing with the new staff at the Justice Center, at the jail. Sheriff Mullins and Chief Deputy Bob Ellis have worked out a staffing plan, which is almost 30 positions. Well, it's 31 positions less than what the CTAS study called for. And so this budget includes funding for 41 new jail employees for 6 months, from January of 24 to the end of June of 24, with the anticipation that we will get the building in May, and then we will have staff on board being trained, and then move the prisoners sometime late summer, early fall. And so that's equal to about $1.2 million. And that's including salaries and benefits and equipping. No, just salary and benefits. And then, so that's equipping them too. That's equipping them as well. So salary, benefits, and equipping them is $1.2 million. The budget also includes creating a new mental health court, which we've talked about the past couple of meetings, and that's through a state grant, $150,000 state grant. So that will pay all of that. Increased funding for the stormwater department. This is something we've and I'll plead guilty to this, that we've been kind of dragging our feet on, and it's not stepping up to the plate on our stormwater department, and TDEC is calling us on it. So we're increasing funding for to implement a plan that we've had for a year or two, and this would include making a part-time employee a full-time employee, increasing funding for stream monitoring, and also for stream monitoring, mapping as well. We have to map all the what they call outflows, where piping, culverts, anything like that, retention ponds that may be out in the county, where water may go and eventually head out to the lake. So that's what included in the funding for the stormwater department. And then there's a 44% increase in premiums for health insurance to restore our reserves in our health insurance plan. And we'll go through that step by step. And then a 10%, and here's a 10% cost of living increase for deputies and corrections officers, which would get the starting pay for a corrections officer to $17 an hour. Right now it's $15.25, and so that should help the sheriff staff the new facility, and also a 5% COLA for general government employees. Some more expenditures that are in the budget is $60,000 shared with the city of Morristown for operations for the animal shelter. The animal shelter struggles now, primarily is it can't keep people because of their low wages, and two is because it's too small. And what the Humane Society people tell me is part of the reason that there's been just a big increase in the number of animals that are being surrendered or are being brought to the shelter is folks who've moved in to the area and maybe into housing that doesn't accept animals. And so they have to surrender their animals, or they want to, and depending on the population in the shelter, they will take them or not. Number two is COVID pets, or families during COVID had adopted dogs or cats, and now that COVID's over and their lifestyle may have changed some, they no longer want to keep their pet, then they're wanting to bring them to the shelter as well. So those are two of the items about the shelter. The pay for shelter employees, about $10 an hour. I think most recently they raised it to $12. So this money, the vast majority of this money will go to increase pay for shelter employees. The director makes about $35,000 a year to manage, which isn't enough. So some of that would go in that direction as well. So of the $60,000, the city of Morristown would pay 30 of it under the contract that we have with them. The next item is the $150,000 of the opioid settlement money. We've got that money transferred from that opioid settlement fund to the general fund to help pay for the jail to work program and recovery court. The jail to work program, it started in 2017 and has operated. They're into their 21st class. They started 2 weeks ago. And I think there's 7 women in this class. And it's about a $300,000 a year operation. We have been supplying between $90,000 and $100,000 a year. And then 4 years ago, McNabb Center did a fundraising campaign throughout the community, raised over $300,000 for this program. So they've been supplying $100,000 a year. And then other grants that McNabb receives from various sources have supplied the other 100 for the 300,000. So what the 300,000 of money that the community supplied has been used. It's gone. So this proposal is to continue our $100,000 that we have been since the start. Add 100. Now that's general fund money. Add $100,000 from the opioid settlement money, which is what it's for, and then McNabb come up with the third $100,000. And then in the recovery court, $50,000 will be used for drug treatment for the participants of the recovery court program. We have some new employees that have been requested in the Register of Deeds office and the Circuit Court Clerk's office. EMA wants to convert a part-time employee to a full-time employee, which is what's happening in stormwater as well. And then the county clerk is eliminating 2 positions, and the assessor is eliminating a half a position that he had when he had a transition between an employee retiring and a new employee coming on. So those are some expenses that you'll see in the budget. Here's some capital expenses that you'll see. A maintenance department workshop, which would be built. It'd just be a metal building on a concrete slab. It'd be built on the Hell House right near the driveway off Church Street. And then 4 vehicles. One is for a sheriff's department detective, an assessor, field appraiser vehicle, community service vehicle. The community service vehicle, the one they use now, will be used by recovery court and do their travels, and then a animal control vehicle. So there's 4 vehicles for about $140,000. The sheriff's department impound lot, $60,000 would come from the general fund, $20,000 would come from the drug fund, for a total of $80,000 for the impound lot. Animal shelter. Here's a proposal that I'm making to address the issue of expanding the animal shelter. When the animal shelter moved from Dice Street, where now TCAT is, and moved out to its location right outside the industrial park on the east end, City of Morristown gave $100,000 to the campaign that they did to raise money. I'm proposing that we match that 300, we match that 100, and then set aside $100,000 and use it as a match for any money that the Humane Society raises in a campaign to expand the animal shelter. And so none of this money would be paid out until the Humane Society makes a commitment, has plans, which they already have, plans for an expansion, makes a commitment to it, start raising money, and we hold on to the money till they're ready to break ground. But we make that commitment. And so that's this proposal. We have a pickup truck for EMA. It's in this year's budget, and it wasn't done, so we're rebudgeting it. It's the cost of the truck is half grant, EMA grant, or TEMA grant, and half county funds. It's an F-250 to haul a trailer that, and other duties, but to haul a trailer that pulls a couple of mules that are used at in different events, as well as for searches out in the community and those kind of things. Every year we budget $25,000 for heat and air systems, heat and air replacement, so that's just a continuation of that. The year we're in now, we budgeted $50,000 to get a engineer to evaluate the balconies on this building. And I did not get that done, and so I'm asking to rebudget that, and so that we can get, I guess, the structural integrity of these balconies examined, and then make a plan on how to beef them up. And then lastly is a jail document imaging project. The jail has, golly bum, they have a ton files, of case files, and filing cabinets full of files that need to be digitized, and so that we may not have to move them when they move it to the new building. So this $21,000 just pays for about half of the one proposal that we've received, and we can get the other money from some of the funds not used for the new jailers, because I don't anticipate that we'll have new jailers on January 1st, so we'll have some funds available there. Okay, requests from nonprofits. You'll have a presentation from Eric Carpenter, the Director of 911, on their request. The library has also asked for $24,300 for their operations to pay health insurance. They're on our plan for electronic library and for pay. I think a 5% increase for their people. ALPS has asked for a couple of thousand. They get about $8,000 now. And Parks and Recreation for a couple of years has asked for a $200,000 increase to their appropriation, and they'll be here to talk about that. And new requests have been submitted from the Morristown Task Force for Diversity, and they'll be here to talk about that, as well as the Morristown Composite Squadron, $3,000. That's like the Civil Air Patrol for teens out at the airport. So they'll be here to talk about that as well. Okay, here's a graph of the fund balance for solid waste, our sanitation fund. And you can see the peak of it in 2022 was $3.5 million. And that was the year that we asked Barry not to buy any vehicles. And so our fund balance grew, as also was the year that the sales tax the sales tax that went into the fund was really strong. The year we're in now, there's 2 trucks that have been funded. There's a brush truck, which we're still working on that one, and then the Sidewinder garbage truck that you approved a couple of months ago. So that takes that fund balance down to about $2.5 million, and then in the budget for next year includes another automated garbage truck. So out of next year's budget, we would use, as proposed, we would use $434,000 of fund balance. And again, you have to remember that the sales tax, which is a major portion of the revenue, is budgeted at a very conservative level. And so the Sidewinder truck would be about $425,000. Disposal fees at the landfill have gone up. Effective July 1, they'll be $50 a ton. And so going from $45 to $50 a ton, so we increased tipping fees by $55,000. Fuel increase of $62,000. A request for 1 new employee, and then a 5% COLA and the health insurance premiums. So that's what's included in that budget. Now, the next budget is the one that there'll have to be some hard decisions made, and that is the highway fund. There's no local money in this budget proposal for paving, 0. And there's $220,000 of state aid money for road paving. Now, state aid money, about 210,000 of it comes from the state, and then we have to supply a 2% match. But it can only be used on certain roads that qualify. And it's not all the roads that you guys want paved and people are fussing about. These are roads that connect to state arteries and state roadways. And so that's included in the budget. Also, what is not in the budget, if you followed this legislation that passed, it was the governor's transportation bill, which included several $1 million for county road departments to do to do roads in their counties, although the only roads that qualify for this funding are the state aid roads. And so Hamblen County is to receive $2.8 million, but it's for state aid roads. And we have to supply the 2% match. So we did not budget that in this budget, and there's still some details that need to be worked out by TDOT, and we had some bigger issues I think we need to deal with before we go on to using that money. In Barry's request, he is asking for equipment for a second patching crew. He has one patching crew now, and I'll show you a picture of the equipment that he's talking about. $450,000 for equipment for a second patching crew, and then $200,000 for some new trucks or pickup trucks, larger pickup trucks for his department. $20,000 increase for fuel, the 5% COLA, and the health insurance premiums are all in there. So now what we're projecting is that this budget as submitted would lead to an $800,000 deficit, which you can't finish a year in the deficit. Although we did back in 2003 in our sanitation fund and raised taxes on that back then 20 years ago. But even if you eliminate those two capital items, you're still in a deficit. And what you'll find, if you look at the revenue side of the highway, you'll see that the gas tax is declining. And you're seeing that across the state because of more fuel-efficient vehicles and the electric vehicles. But mostly the more fuel-efficient vehicles. And because gas tax is paid on, not on your, let's say you buy, not on the price of gasoline, but on the gallons that you buy. So it's so many cents per gallon, and so that this has to be addressed during this budget process. Here's just some pictures of the patch crew and what they're doing. The skid steer and the attachments that he's asking for, and the roller and a trailer. There's a couple of trailers, I think, is in his request, but I asked Barry to send me some pictures so you guys can see what they do. And he has one. He would like to have one on one end of the county and one on the other. All right, next is the debt service fund. And again, this is where we make our house payments and pay off our bonds. And this year, we've anticipated this. This was part of the overall debt management plan for the Justice Center and the new elementary school, is that we would build the fund balance to over $13 million, then start spending it as we pay off the principal on the bonds. This year it did not. We did not use as much as we had anticipated because of our interest income. And I'll show you that. Now, the interest income, what I'm talking about is, all right, think about these buckets. All right, you have your debt service bucket here, then you have your construction bucket here for the Justice Center and the elementary school. Now, the interest I'm talking about is interest on this bucket, on our debt service, the money that we have in place to pay off our bonds, okay? So the interest that we earned on the construction money that we're holding, the bonds that it's actually bond money, that's what we use to help pay for the courtroom, finishing out the courtroom in the Justice Center was interest income here. Now this interest income will be used to help pay off the bonds. And so what you'll see is that our interest income is up 400% from what it was last fiscal year. And that's because of the rise in interest rates. And so we anticipate collecting about $1.3 million in interest, and that will help us. We'll use less of the fund balance to help make the payments. And so that will help us build more capacity in our debt service fund later on. And then school maintenance of effort, a term that many of you have heard or may not completely understand because it applies differently in different situations. But in school maintenance of effort, that's the level of funding that we have to maintain by law. And so for the school system, for the Hamblen County school system, the last 2 years, fiscal year 22 and fiscal year 23, our maintenance of effort has been the 27.3 million. All right, that's our maintenance of effort. Now, the commission voted to appropriate some one-time funding on top of that. But as far as the maintenance of effort that the county is required to keep, it's at 27.3 million. Now, under the budget for 23-24, the school system has, through the state and through Governor Lee's education initiative, will receive $13 million new dollars from the state based on different criteria. There's a base amount per student and then other criteria based on the level of needs of the child or whether it's a CTE student or so forth. So there's about $13 million new money from the state for the school system. Under the law, the county has to maintain its current funding, but doesn't have to increase it. And I think it's for about 5 years. So this would be the first year of that new funding. And so what I asked Mr. Bunch to do is to submit a budget with the 27.3 million in there and no one-time funding, since they're getting the $3 million or $13 million from the state. So that's what I asked him to do. And here's also a graph that shows our funding. And what you will see later on in the process, probably the second meeting about schools, is what I want to do, and you'll see this in the revenues. We look at the revenues of the general fund, is because we're doing so well with sales tax, and we've done this the last couple of years, is move some property tax from schools and replace it with sales tax and move that property tax to the general fund to offset the cost of the new staff for the jail and the other expenses. And so that would amount to about 12 cents on the tax rate. And you'll see during the hearings that the appropriation for sales tax for the schools will be less than what we've been collecting. So it's a very conservative, safe suggestion, in my opinion, and also helps offset. Basically what we're doing is managing our sources of revenue and putting it where it needs to be to fund the services that we want to provide. So in a summary, as far as the major challenges of this budget, first is paving, is finding local money for paving. Second is rebuilding the reserves of our health insurance fund, which we've addressed in this budget. The staffing of the new jail and its $1.2 million that it will cost, and then the pay increases. The 5% for general employees and 10% for post-certified and the jailers. So as far as the calendar goes, this is what the calendar looks like is next Tuesday will be sanitation, highway, debt service, and then the general fund revenues. And I ask you to set aside a couple hours for that meeting. Then on June the 1st, we'll have the Board of Education presentation, then do some work on the general fund, and then the following Tuesday is talk some more about the school system, and talk some more about the general fund. Then on June the 8th, we'll have the general fund, and a lot of the time be spent on the sheriff's department and the jail on that date. And then on June 13th, we'll have the presentations of the agencies who are asking for new funding. 911 will present them and deliberate some more. And then on the 15th, as a committee, now you're meeting as a committee, not as the commission, then you'll make a recommendation to the full commission on the budget. And then we can vote on the budget on the 29th of June. And I ask, again, that you set aside a couple hours for each of these meetings. And, so your eyes may glass over, but they'll be productive. Any questions?
Yes, sir, I have one. I was noticing that the wheel tax, none of it goes to the highway, right? Well, how about that? How about that, since it's wheel tax and it doesn't, would that not help our paving issues?
That's an option, yes.
Okay.
That's an option.
Okay, thank you.
Now, one thing, Ms. Howe, all right, it all goes to the general fund now, and it generates about 1.6 million, right? Just kind of think about this. So if you move it from the general fund to paving, you've got to replace that $1.6 million, or you've got a hole in there. So you can't just take it and not replace it.
Because it goes to general fund right now.
How much does the dollar on the wheel tax bring in?
About $50,000,
50,000.
between $50,000 and $55,000.
I like that idea because it's easier.
But yes, that is an option. Whether you move it, whether you raise it,
Or just use part of it,
or part of it.
yeah. Okay.
One thing too on the highway, and we can get into it more next week, though, is if you'll look at in your notebooks, if you look at the revenue side of the highway, and there's two sources of local revenue for the highway fund. One is sales tax and one is mineral severance tax. There is what's called by law a five-year average, and it's basically a maintenance of effort. Is you cannot fund that area and local funding less than the 5-year average of those sources of revenue. So if you increase that, knowing it's not just a one-time deal.
Mayor, you spoke of the gas tax going down, and we've heard this, like you said, conservation efforts and electric vehicle. I believe the state is now implementing something for electric vehicles as well. EVP, is that what it's called, something like that?
Right now, an electric vehicle pays $100 when they register, renew, not when you purchase them, but when you renew them, you pay $100. And, but that all goes to the state. Now, under what passed the legislature is it goes to $200, and $100 of it goes to the locals. And then I think over a 5-year period, it increases to $270, I think, or something like that. And then it's tied to the CPI after that.
Do you think, have you heard any numbers or feedback, is this going to offset that loss in gas tax?
Starting off, it won't. No, it won't. Not because, in Hamblen County, I think more in the metropolitan areas.
Sure.
You'll see more of that in the metropolitan areas, but not in our area.
We don't see a whole lot of electric vehicles yet. Right.
The fee that used to be on a tag, when you renewed your tag every year, the fee, is that state fee gonna come back, or is it?
Yes, this was yes.
So when does it come back?
It was a 1-year tax.
I
It
think
was a
it
1-year
starts
tax
in
relief.
July, doesn't it?
Yeah,
It starts in
July.
July.
So after everybody, how many vehicles, as soon as you cycle through, the next one will start back.
Anything else? Okay, Mr. Chairman.
I have a question, please. Do we get any of the international fuel taxes that most commercial vehicles have to file? Do we get any of that at all?
What's the name of it? What'd you call it?
It's the International Fuel Tax Association, IFTA, is the short.
I don't recognize that. There's two lines in the revenue side of highway, and one is your gas tax, and another is a petroleum tax. Whether that's it, I don't
It's
know.
not. Thank you for answering.
Chairman, that's all I've got.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for the information. A lot to digest, got a lot of work ahead of us. Encourage everybody to be in attendance. I know sometimes things take us away, but as the mayor said, we need to devote a couple of hours to these meetings, and they get long, sometimes they run longer, but we can tough it out. Anybody have anything they need to add? We're adjourned.